Joining me now with more on the upcoming deadline to reaffirm United States' commitment to the JCPOA nuclear agreement is Dr. Danny Orbach, military historian from the Department of Asian Studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and Dr. Martin Sherman, founder and executive director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. Thank you both very much for coming back into the studio. So, Dr. Orbach, I'm going to start with you. Pompeo, during his first leg of the trip, he's landing in Riyadh, and he spoke with Saudi officials about potentially introducing new sanctions against Iran. First of all, do you think that that would be an effective tool if the United States were to both reaffirm the deal and put sanctions? And B, do you even think that that's really legal under the terms of the deal?
First of all, we need to see that Pompeo is trying to convince the convinced. It's not difficult to convince Saudi Arabia or Israel that new sanctions need to be applied on Iran. The real difficulty is to convince the Europeans. The second question is what the Trump administration actually wants. And I think that's unclear. Personally, I don't believe that this administration has a coherent Iran strategy, but if it has, then there are two options. Either they are trying to impose more sanctions to press Iran and the Europeans to some kind of a better deal. There are three main points: the ballistic missile program of Iran, there is the point of the Iranian involvement in the Middle East, there is this point of inspections in military bases, and finally the deadline of 10 years, after which some of the sanctions are going to phase out. So either they want a better deal, to arrive at a better deal by applying more pressure, or they want to blow up the deal altogether. I'm not sure that they're completely certain what they do want.
Dr. Sherman, do you think that Trump is trying to blow up the deal, and to what end? I mean, what would his policy then have to be?
You know, I think this is a deal that's impossible to fix and has to be nixed. If you look at everything that's happened since 2015, when this unfortunate accord was put together, we can see how catastrophic the Obama policy was, and in many ways how imbecilic the Israeli opposition was in trying to prevent or undermining Netanyahu's efforts to stop it. And this is a real mea culpa moment for the Israeli opposition, who I remember the head of the opposition saying he trusts President Obama to get a good deal. Well, obviously his trust was misplaced. Look, I think it's going to be extremely difficult to roll back what we had in place before. The sanctions brought Iran to the table. I think it's going to be extremely difficult to institute them. And I think that in the short run, the only thing that will cause Iran to back away from its adventurism across the world, including its nuclear power, its nuclear program, is a credible, coercive option that will convince Iran that their infrastructure, their bridges, their dams, their power stations are in danger. Because we remember what happened in 2000.
So are you speaking militarily then?
They must believe that it is a credible threat, because if they don't, nothing will stop them. Look,
so you're suggesting we get rid of the Iranian deal and go to war?
Well, Iran must believe that the United States will be prepared to do that, because if they don't, nothing will stop them from carrying on and eventually reaching a nuclear power and being a rogue nation with all this structural capacity.
But that means that one of two things will happen following that point. Either the Iranians believe it and everything goes great, and then a war breaks out, or they call it bluff.
In 2003, there at least a school of thought according to which the Iranians shut down their nuclear program because of the assertive and robust American action in their neighborhood, in Iraq. The Iranians will not be convinced by any kind of negotiations unless, in the short run, unless they know there is a credible threat militarily against them. They will carry on with their program. In the long run, the only solution is regime change, which of course the Obama deal would, by enriching them economically, the current regime enriching it economically, empowering it militarily, and entrenching it politically, has made more remote. So I think at the moment we're between a rock and a hard place.
I completely disagree with my colleague here. I think it's the same story of 2003 all over again. In 2003, the US used misguided information and attacked Iraq to achieve regime change and to make geopolitical changes in the region. The result was a complete disaster. It would happen again with Iran.
That's not my point. That's not my point. My
No,
point is
but I
that
guess
they
my
backed away
question
from
is
they
what-
backed away from the nuclear. They backed away from their nuclear program when they saw a credible military threat in the neighborhood. The fact how the Iraqi war
But
was
that's
total
Iraq,
regime
and this is
change.
Iraq. But this is not Iraq is the problem. And the second is that their economy isn't in the same position it was years ago when they came to formulate this deal with Obama.
with all the saber rattling in Iran at the moment, they've got very difficult problems at home. They've got a huge water crisis, which is going to cause millions of people to relocate. They've got spiraling unemployment, which hasn't been affected by the lifting of the sanctions. They've got great domestic unrest here. People are walking around with signs, according to Al Jazeera, saying death to Rouhani, and no to Palestine, no to Gaza. I'm prepared to give my life for Iran, but not for Lebanon, and things like that. So there's huge unrest there, and trying to reach an acceptable agreement with Iran by anything that has less than a credible coercive threat behind it is, in my opinion, fooling ourselves. By the way, I might agree with my colleague here that the Iraqi war was badly conducted, but that's got nothing to do.
Right.
The United States has proved that it can bring down any regime with air power and special forces in Iraq, in Serbia. They can bring it down. To build another regime after that, that's a completely different question. But in Iran, that's probably much easier than it is in Iraq.
Except Serbia, no regime has been brought down only with air power. You must use military. You must use ground forces.
But you must use some ground forces, mainly special forces.
So the question again is then who's going to fight that fight? Because you have so far, actually, we've just heard that 80,000 Iranian troops are just in Damascus. You have the United States, you have Russian forces, you have Syrian forces.
That's the question. But democracies have to decide at some stage if they're not going to fight and win wars that they can choose. They might be forced into a war of necessity, which will cost them much more, which basically what happened in the Second World War. The Second World War, when the West backed away from restraining Germany when they could do it, they entered the Second World War, which was the greatest human catastrophe to date.
All right. Well, my final question, Dr. Orbach, I'll bring it back to you. Let's assume that let's assume that the United States leaves the deal. Okay, what should Israel's immediate reaction then be? Should we be bracing for impact, and how so?
I think Israel should prepare to a confrontation with Iran in any case, but especially if the United States is going to blow up the deal. Because what's going to happen is that the other partners of Iran, the EU, maybe China, certainly Russia, will just break the sanctions, trade with Iran freely, will get a much stronger Iran, unrestrained by a deal. I think that's the introduction to a regional confrontation.
All right, Dr. Daniel Orbach, Dr. Martin Sherman, thank you both very much for coming in.
Thank you.